Hello everyone, welcome to the new chapter uh, in Web Administration 3, INFS 309. In this chapter, we are going to study about the extending the web environment. Basically, this chapter is not going to be as long as the previous chapters. That will be actually a little bit shorter. So in this chapter is actually we will be talking about this is the over. I mean, like these are the outlines of the chapter that we will cover. But basically, let me tell you, we will be covering basically three main topics here. We will be talking about FTP, and then we will be talking about like the news server and the media servers, and then finally we have some notes about the telnet and how to remotely access the web server. Well, so starting about like the introduction, actually the types of web services or the services that can be available on the web, they are too much actually. But here we can categorize some of them. I can't say that I can categorize them all under these three main classes, but these are like three of the common types or categories that can be as a services. First of them, the first of them is FTP. Second one is a news server, that it's actually short for NNTP, and the last one is Telnet protocol, or what we call remote access. And actually, there's also many other types and many other tools that can be used for remote access. Well, starting about FTP, and we will be handling this in the first portion of the slides of this presentation. It requires login. It actually requires a login, that means a valid username and password in order to be able to send and receive information. So this username and password are actually not encrypted, and it is actually sent to the server. I mean, like it is communicated between the client and the server in a plain text, which actually can be kind of unsecure and actually untrusted, especially like when we talk about like kind of sensitive data to be communicated through the network. Second one here, and I'm going to talk about this actually in more details just in a few, I mean, like in these coming slides. But I'm just wrapping up from the beginning. What are the three categories that we will be talking about here within this session? Second one is the news server. That it is actually a protocol that it's mainly being developed to create threaded discussions in a newspaper, or some kind of like a grouping or chat, or like multi-threading chatting. So whereby participants are exchanging information in kind of real time. They even can post and can like send and upload kind of different data there. The third one here, it is about telnet, or like what we call remote access in the general term. So Telnet here, it is a protocol that it's been used remotely, that it's been used since a very long time, um, as the server, or like as to ping or reach a server remotely. So it is not actually frequently used by Microsoft, although it was used before, but like starting from Microsoft Server 2003, I believe that they have started to they have started to quit using it, while employing and invoking other means in order to in order to satisfy the remote access. Well, so and now let's just talk about FTP. So FTP, it is actually one of the main services that is existed on the web. That can be existed on the web server. So you remember that time when we have our lab and we installed and configured IIS. FTP is already there. It is actually a plug-in, or it is actually one of the functions that can be attached with any web server package or any web server software suite. So FTP mainly used for transferring kind of big size files, and it's meant only to transfer files, to transfer like bulky data. To say what I mean by bulky, it is that the files that can support a huge amount of that can have a huge amount of size in both directions. Like either client can contact the server in order to fetch a file from the server, and we call this process as a download, or actually a server can be it can be able to accept like kind of files from the client, and we call this process as an upload. Well, so FTP client here, it is the browser. So any browser here, any of our internet browsers are called the FTP client. And it's actually by default, it's already configured there. You don't need actually to have any kind of backup software in order to activate that host or like that kind of client. So it also, there is actually kind of like in other systems, there is actually a kind of command line command line window or terminal that allows us to like to open an FTP session and communicate with the server. But actually this is not actually so popular. So like currently most of the most of the applications here are actually using are actually depending on the GUI. Well, FTP also can operate as in two modes here. They can operate as anonymous servers, or they can have a required valid login. So when we say anonymous server, it is that they do not need to like to provide any credentials in order in order to be authenticated to the server pool, or like to any kind of network, or even to be authenticated to the to the users who are connected to it. So it is just simply existed there, connected to the internet, and whoever need to access it, he can access it without any without any credentials. And even that server can be integrated, or like can join any kind of network or domain without any kind of authentication. So we call this anonymous connection. While on the other hand, here we have the regular one, which is the most used one whenever we are actually implementing FTP. It is actually, we have to provide it as we need to configure a kind of a valid login in order to protect FTP, FTP data. Whatever data is being stored in the server, of course, they have to be securely managed and wisely disseminated to the to the different users. Well, so FTP servers also are not secure in anyhow, even with the valid login here, because actually the username and password, they are not encrypted. Rather, they are actually sent in a plain text, between the server and the client. Well, so designing to, designed to, they are designed also to download programs, software, patches, and also service packs, music, video, whatever actually files. So they are not only meant for like those kind of text files to say when we talk about like file transferring, but actually rather we are talking about like any kind of file that is actually that can be from like a normal size up to the huge size. And actually the essence of FTP server in particular, it is actually revealed when it handles those kind of huge files, that like those files that can go like beyond 3 to 4 gigs or like 5 gigs, while the other protocols like HTTP, they actually fail to to open a session in order to keep transferring all these kind of bits for that longer time from the from the server. That's why FTP here comes in place. But of course, you see, this is like a give and take. There's kind of a give and take, meaning that security here is being compromised in order to get that kind of feature. Well, so FTP also, usually operates on two parts: data part and control part. So when we talk about control part, it is actually the part 21 that it's used for command, and general control message. This is actually the part that it's used when we want to send an acknowledgement from the user, from the client to the server, and the server replies, replies to the client. So it is like the ACNAC, if you remember, the kind of, that kind of um, uh, networking basics to say, in order to initiate any connection between the client and the server. And I have also explained this to you in the previous chapters, as I remember. So all of these, when we say control, or like control information, this is the kind of information that actually establish the session, monitor the session, meaning that keep the session alive, ensuring that the session is not exiting, and also terminates the session. This is, so that's why, the kind of message that are being transferred here, these are not the data message. They are not the files that we are actually meant to transfer to the client, or like the client is actually receiving from the server, but rather it is just like these kind of data, or like this kind of message. It is actually a small size message even. They are not so huge. Like the kind of message that can be like transferred over this port. Anyway, so I hope you really get the idea here. It is just not the data. It is not, this port is not meant to transfer the data. Rather, it is meant to transfer the control message that actually control the session in order to terminate, open the session, renew the session to say, and keep tracking of the, like the user credentials. Like both parties credential, the transmitter and the receiver. Okay, so talking about the data part here, it is actually the port 20, which means that whenever the client is connecting to the server for transmitting the data, or like for receiving a data or requesting a data from the server, it actually connects to port 20. But first, of course, it needs to initiate a connection using port 21, and then when the server sends the data, it of course sends the data on port 20. So this is actually the data, meaning that this is the music file, for example, that you are meant to receive. Or like, for example, this is the ISO image for any kind of operating system, let's say, or any kind of like multimedia file that you're actually expected to receive from the server. So it is only transferred on port 20. I hope this is actually come to be clear now. Well, there are two types of transmissions here in FTP. The first one is active, and the other one we call it passive, and this is actually the most common one, the second one. And well, so when we talk about active FTP, is actually the clients usually listens to the they usually listen to data in random port. Doesn't matter to be port 20, okay, or any kind of port, okay. So client then inform the server the port number that they are receiving data. So it is the client that it is the client that decide which port he would like or he prefers to receive the data from. So that's why here FTP server have to be listening and like sensing any kind of control message comes on port 21 first, 21. It's being transmitted over port 21 to the server, telling that there is actually a request of transmitting data, and then the server have to wait from the receiver have to wait from the receiver. Like the server have to wait from the client himself, which part the client is suggesting to receive the data. There is no, it is not common nowadays, by the way. It is because actually, again, by implementing the firewall in the network, this is actually very, like it has actually blocked all this kind of data, because like most likely the weakest point in any network here, it is usually the end user. That's why it is highly possible that any of these end users, they can be kind of a fake, or like can be an anonymous, or to say a malicious end user who is actually trying to sniff a data in a kind of unlegitimate way from the server. Okay, so that's why this kind of method is not actually being it's not being employed. Like it is not being implemented in the current era of networking, or like in the current version of networking. Coming to the passive FTP, it is unprivileged client. We call it the unprivileged client. So it is unprivileged client. It is connecting to an unprivileged server. So FTP server usually uses port 20 in order to tell the client which unprivileged port that the server, which unprivileged port on the server it should use here for data transfer. Here, okay, so port 20, okay, although the port 20, it is the port that is being used for data here, but actually, um, most likely this port is used to be mirrored, or used to be linked, something like we are linking from one port to another in order to enhance, in order to enhance the credibility of the server and enhance the integrity of the data transmission. Okay, when we talk about unprivileged port here, it is that any port above the number 1024, it is called unprivileged port. So which means that it is less common, but it's hard to be protected here. Why? It is because it's not well known. That's why it's less common, but it's hard to be protected by any. But anyhow, from the nature of the port number, selecting a port number above 1024, also it will be like kind of difficult for the attacker to decide here. But of course, like because currently uh, at the end, port numbers are not actually, I mean, like they cannot be unlimited. They cannot be, I mean, like the port number cannot be assigned as to be any kind of unlimited and huge number, but they have actually a limit. The limit actually can reach up to 5,000 or like 6,000, the number of 6,000 plus plus plus, which means that 6xxx, that can be actually the I mean like the I mean like the maximum range of that port number that can be assigned. Well, so that's why. So here we will actually see the process in a few. I mean, like in this coming slide, we will see the process of how to communicate between a client and a server in more graphical way, and this will I believe it will ease the understanding of you more than the I mean like the wording here that explains the situation. Well, so all you need to know here is that unprivileged port, any port can be any port that is above 1024, it is called the unprivileged port. The most web-based FTP clients, they use actually a passive here. It is because this kind of connection, it is a bit, it is little bit to say, or somehow it is guaranteed, or like it is kind of secure to say. Okay, because actually at least it will not put the I mean like the port decision, I mean like the party that decides the port, it's not the client in this case, but rather it is the server. Well, so let's just talk about this in more graphical representation with more procedures. So we have actually two parts here. The first one is the active FTP, and then the other one is the passive FTP. Okay. um, well, so all right, so talking about the active FTP here in step one, as you are reading, so first the client here sends the client command port, the client command port port contact the server's command port and sends the command to the port 1027, and then in step two the server actually sends the act back to the I mean like to the client, meaning that first actually this is a control message, the one that is actually it has been sent in here. There's actually a message that it's being sent from the client to the server telling him that he is willing to connect to the server. So that control message is being replied with, I mean like it is being responded from the server with an acknowledgement that the I mean like it acknowledges to the client the port number, that yes, you can use the port number. Then step three initiates, because here in this case, remember, it is the client that decides which port to use. So the client here sends a message as in a control message telling the server, hey, I want to use, I want to communicate with you, I mean like by downloading data from you using port 1027. Is this okay or not? So port here, I mean like the server here in step two replies, yes, okay, I'm fine with that. And then the server again here, it actually sends the data into port 1027 directly, and then finally the client sends the ACK back when the end of the transmission has come, I mean like has happened. Okay, to indicate this is the I mean like the end of the transmission. Well, so in the other way, when we talk about like passive FTP, first the client contacts the server on command port and issues a passive command. So here it is actually using like the passive command in order to tell the server that this is actually a type of passive. I mean like this is a type of passive communication. Then the server actually replies with the port. So here the server is the one who's suggesting the port, not the client here. So the server here is replying with the port that telling the client, yes, I want you to use that port in order to retrieve your data from. So now the client in step three, it actually connects to that port, requesting the data, or like sending, I mean like a get message to get the data, I mean like whatever file. And then finally, I mean like the server, of course, reply and opens the session for the user, I mean like for the client in order to download that. This is actually kind of summarized way of the I mean like of the scenario. You can reach back to the textbook for like more information about this. And this is actually very important. So please just put in your mind both of them are actually really important, because in any of your assessments you'll be really asked and like to explain, and even with graphical demonstration, how is this happening. Well, of course, so how to use FTP? Of course, there is a command, I mean like in order to communicate with FTP in the terminal, there is actually the command line there. So the command line here, it includes a lot of keywords that actually administer and control the session of the FTP. Many commands are there, and they are even easy to be remember and memorize. So for example, when we say FTP and the host name here, so it means that the host name could be like the IP address, or it could be the name of the, like the name of the server, the name of like the client. So it is to initiate a connection. So open host, it is actually once the host has been started, then it opens the connection, and then close is uses for closes, and so on and so forth. You can actually like review them. As for example here, as file names, it displays all the file names that can be existed in a server, and so on. So, okay, so these are actually a bunch of the commands, also more commands that can be, like that can be triggered here. For example, mget file name. So when we say mget file name here, could be any name of the file. So for example, mget send mail RPM. RPM here this is actually the extension on Linux. The extension on Linux. So this seems to be a kind of application, or a kind of executable file that has been designed for Linux. Okay, so mget here it is to download multiple files using the wildcard. Okay, so this is the file name that to be downloaded. Well, here put meaning upload, get meaning download. These are two most important, commands that you could think of there. And mput here, it is actually to like multiple put. So it is to upload multiple files within, with the use of wildcard. Many of them are actually there. So cd directory lcd moves to to another directory. Pwd, it is to display the current directory of the file. I believe that even most of them you have been actually familiarized with them. You have been familiar with them before. Like when you have dealt with the Windows Server, because most of these commands are actually being inherited from the the command line, the Windows command line, or the Windows terminal to say. Well, so moving about the other topic now, which is number two. The second topic in the chapter that talks about the understanding the news server. So news server, as you know, and as we have defined in the beginning, this is actually a threaded discussions. What we call a thread. What do we mean by a thread? A thread is actually a process that can be initiated and recreated again and again and again. It can be duplicated. So a thread here, it is that like a process that actually has many processes, or like one connection that has more than sub connection in the within it. That's why we call it a thread. So it seems like you're initiating a connection, and then from that connection you can actually divide the connection to have more than one sub connection. Why are we doing this? It is because like it is a simple way. Imagine that you're actually communicating on Facebook with other people, or like with your friends. How are you able to communicate with all of them in the same time? This is actually called threading communication. It is called by threading. Like this communication, it is done actually by the use of, or like by the development, or by the deployment of what we call a threading programming. Okay, so it is posting messages on a news group and have others to respond in it in an instant manner. And even more than one user can interact with you, and you can actually, have a group call, for example, or like have a group message, a message that can be broadcasted to more, to all of the, to the entire group members, or like you can actually select a few of them, or like some of them, and we call this as a multicast. So when the time that you're sending a message for a group of people, but not the whole group. Well, so a news group here focuses on single topic. Usually, this is actually implemented when why we term it as a news group here. It is because it is usually used in business more. This is like the what we call the market term for this kind of theory. But like the theory behind this and the science behind this, it is the use of the multi-threading programming, or like multi-threading communication here. How are we use it? There are actually a few programming languages, like a bunch of programming languages that are supporting threading programming. For example, Java, C++, C Sharp, and actually Java is really good in this, because Java has kind of, it has a lot of support and a lot of libraries that can actually support the threading and the socket creation. Actually, this is kind of advanced topic to say, and if you're interested, just Google up threading or like multi-threaded programming using Java. There is a lot of tutorials that actually explain this in a very generous way. Well, so again, I'm just coming back. So when we apply this theory or this concept, I mean, like on the market, we call it a news group. So it is just a group of people who are just discussing a topic. There is actually more than 40,000 public newspaper, like for example, PC Magazine, like for example, the what we call the Guardian. I'm just naming those kind of famous newspapers. Okay, so all of these are actually kind of examples from, I mean, like from the news servers. They have meant to be, I mean, like they have meant to be dedicated in order to interact with more people and um, in more like orchestration way. Um, and there are actually hundreds of gigabytes of information that are being generated every day. So you need to know that, I mean, like in order to initiate this kind of communication, of course, we need to have, I mean, like we need to think and we need to consider, I mean, like the amount of data that is used to be in and out, that is used to be exchanged from and within, from and to, I mean, like the servers and the hosts. So, and use servers can be set up to deal with relevant topics, for example, so sharing information and on brainstorming product, for example, if we are talking about like marketing or like about a particular company, or it can be like a management issue or local software issues. This is actually like when you're implementing the new server to be dedicated for a company business, or it can be actually kind of a publicly, or like it can be like a kind of a general purpose news server, like as I have mentioned just now, PC Magazine can be like BBC, for example. So all of these are actually called, I mean, like also Voice of America, also a very popular news server that it's actually available there, and it allows a lot of interactions there. Well, so network news transfer protocol, it is the protocol that it actually has been developed to work behind the scene in order to manage and control this, I mean, like this kind of theory or like this kind of concept to like to enable a multi-threading discussion and like I mean, like a one-to-one or like one-to-many or many-to-many kind of transmission and, I mean, like communication. So it is used for managing the news groups. Even it can actually it is allowed, or like it can support to manage even, I mean, like an inter groups communication, meaning that from one particular group you can actually communicate with the other group. So so it is actually a really popular and really powerful tool, powerful protocol that is being even developed rapidly. I mean, like especially in the recent era. So of course, because I mean, like since it's a protocol and it has to be implemented, there is actually a procedure to do this. I mean, like a commands in order to, I mean, like to ensure that, I mean, like in order for the administrator, the server administrator to communicate with, I mean, like to configure it. So these commands are actually kind of easy way. I mean, like they're actually easy to remember, and they are so handy to, I mean, like to deal with, like for example, posts. So it is just to send an article to the news list. It is just to retrieve. So it is just an English, a plain English commands, but they are meant to do some kind of a specific function within the protocol. Well, so let's now talk about like how to configure and how to reach, I mean, like the remote server. So here we are talking about Linux platform, but actually we will be also talking about like Windows. How is this going to be in Windows in a few slides, or like in a slide or two ahead. Well, starting with Linux, it is why we are starting with Linux is because actually Telnet, when it was invented back there in the 90s, in the 90s, I remember, or like even before this, Telnet was one of the very first terminals in order to enable a remote access to the, I mean, like to the server from the host, I mean, like from the client to the host. All right, so it enables a remote access to the server, and it's very easy and very straightforward to say. It is just it doesn't need you to actually have an encryption of any data, or like kind of having a username or password. Maybe recently they have just upgraded that, but before it was just a simple direct access to the server. As long as you know the port number and you know the IP address of the server, you can just simply connect to it using that session. Well, so talking about Telnet here, it works on, or it listens on port 23, meaning that it is a service that runs in a server. Again, here I'm just wrapping up this. So when we say Telnet, it is a remote access service that is existed on a server that allows the clients to remotely access the server without being connected directly to the server. Okay, meaning that imagine that you're staying at your home and you want to connect, like for example, your server that existed at work, which is like a few, I mean, like a few tens of kilometers away, or maybe like hundreds of kilometers away from you. Definitely, it is actually connecting. I mean, like your network will be different from the network that where the server is running on. So the server is actually listening on port 23, and so any client want to access the telnet here, it accesses it, and like it accesses the server by connecting to the port 23. So whenever the client connecting to port 23, it means that it uses the telnet service in order to access that particular server. So by default, telnet is installed, but it's not enabled when we talk about Linux here. Okay, so in order to enable it, so you need to run these kind of commands here. Like for example, as you are reading here, check config telnet on, and then you are restarting the xnet, which is the, I mean, like the daemon here. So telnet should not be used in a non-secure environment. Why? It is because the username and password, again, they are not encrypted. So here it seems that when we talk about like these kind of extended services, until now we are actually talking about like kind of unencrypted data, or like unencrypted credentials that are being sent from the, that are being communicated from the both parties, the transmitter and the receiver. So either FTP or Telnet, both of them are actually I mean, like insecure. So here there is actually an upgrade on this, or not an upgrade. There is an actually alternative to the telnet. I mean, like to telnet. I mean, in order to enable secure remote access, we call it secure shell. So here it provides a secure remote access with an encrypted username and password. It is actually further described in the next chapter, where you will see more information about this. So um, you cannot actually log in as a root here. You can log in as a regular user and switch the privilege to be as a root. So when you're actually using Linux, of course, to switch to the root, you need to use the su command privilege. So um, Windows users GUI is to configure remote access. It is more complicated than Linux here. So because when we talk about like you here, I'm sorry, this is actually a typo here. It's supposed to be GUI. I will just modify it in a while. So implementing Linux, I mean, like, sorry, implementing Telnet in Windows here, it is actually a bit more complicated than than it is in Linux. Well, so let's just talk about like let's talk about Windows terminal, Windows remote access, Microsoft server remote access. So here in Microsoft server, there are actually two types to reach that server. The first one, and the most, I mean, like the most commonly used one here, it is called the GUI, where is actually it's a graphical user interface that actually implements a telnet services in a remote server access. So it is a bit complicated here. So it's not used by any normal users, but rather it's used by those kind of skilled and the expertise users within the domain. So the other one here, the alternative one, it is the Windows Terminal services. So it is are also utilized. So it requires a software to be installed on each client, whoever uses to communicate. The difference between these two here, that one and this one, the GUI, of course, it's a user graphical interface, but here it requires a lot of configurations that you need to go through. But when we talk about like Windows Terminal services, it is actually a little bit easier and a little bit straightforward. You don't need to configure too much, but you need to I mean, like get yourself familiarized with a lot of commands in order to be able to I mean, like to administer um, and manage and administer that, I mean, like the created session in a particular scenario. So there are actually many commands there in the terminal services, but coming to the like to two of the most commonly used commands here. The first one is called net. It is actually the main command in order to access a remote server. So it is used to start the server, share folders, and add and delete users. So everything related to the server management, it can be actually um, reached by using the can be done actually by using the net command. Of course, net has to be accompanied with it has to be involved or like joined with another command in order to specify this, because net here it is just the general or the global like set of it is the global command that is being used here. NetSH here, it is actually to deal with the networking. So anything related to networking in the server, it can be administered and can be monitored or like tuned using the NetSH. So it creates network shell that allows configuring and displaying dozens of networks related items, like for example, adding deleted IP addresses, capturing server information, sniffing data, and also for other purposes related to diagnostics. Okay, so we are talking now about media servers. So media servers, of course, these are the servers that are meant to provide all these kind of multimedia applications or like multimedia services. For example, and one of the it is the famous one to be, like to say, YouTube here. So YouTube is meant to provide, like the kind of videos, like video multimedia file. So it is one popular example of streaming media services. So how can we identify it in general? Let's just give the definition for the streaming media services. So it is used to transfer. These are the services that are used to transfer video, audio, or image, any kind of multimedia item uh, in different perspective. For example, like these kind of contents or this kind of materials, they can be dealt or they can be actually communicated in education, in health, in entertainment, in even government, in military, in any kind of environment. So by default, user datagram protocol, and this is the most important part here. So when we talk about media streaming services, we're actually talking about the UDP, user datagram protocol. It is actually the other alternative to TCP there. That's why here TCP is mentioned. Okay, so why UDP and what is it about? So it is by using UDP. So the popular one, as you know here, it is TCP and HTTP. So TCP here, okay, it provides a high level of security. Talking about TCP, I'm talking about TCP now. Although it provides a high level of security there, but it has actually a lot of a lot of delay, because TCP by its nature, it is actually classified or like it is defined as a connection protocol. It is a state or like connection based protocol, meaning that like any user need to access the web server, he has to send an ACK request to the server. Then the server actually fetches the request, processes it, and it checks the security, some of the security related parameters from the from the client. If he ensures if the server ensures that the client is clean and he's actually legitimate to say, then he sends him the ACK. He sends him the acknowledgement, and then the client actually start sending or start requesting the data at the end. So this process actually takes a time in order to whenever we're actually dealing with kind of real time data. Imagine that you want to display a real time video to say. So if each time you want to create a connection, or if each time you want to update or you refresh your web page, you need to send and receive packets even in the same connection itself, because for every packet it has to be checked if that packet is actually legitimate or not. So, and if it is actually from that particular user who have already generated the connection. So TCP is actually really handling this. I mean, like it really concerns about like the security and like the privacy of the data. So, but talking about UDP here, it is more simpler than this. Of course, it's on the expense of security. Although security here, it's not really guaranteed in UDP whenever we are creating a connection, because UDP is being defined as a connectionless protocol, meaning it doesn't create any kind of connection with the with the server without the need to send to send an acknowledgement or a request, and then asking the server to acknowledge that request to the client so that the client can actually connect to the resource. This is not actually being done in UDP. Rather, it is just a client that actually requests a data directly if the server is available. Then if the data are available in the server, then the server immediately starts to stream the data to the back to the client. Well, so for that, this is actually started to be a beneficial for kind of multimedia applications, especially when we talk about like a real-time video, real-time voice over IP. Okay, so all of these protocols, all of these services, they actually benefit a lot from having a kind of protocol that doesn't have a lot of complicated details in the session. Rather, it just only accepts data and transmits data in a very fast way. So with UDP, we guarantee less delay in the transmission and more more transmission rate. But to be honest, actually, in nowadays, a lot of enhancements, especially in research, has been done in TCP in order to bring the TCP to be very kind of almost real-time friendly protocol that actually allow transmissions that can actually satisfy the real-time data requirements, so that delay and throughput, they are actually both being enhanced and not really compromised by having the the session control of the TCP. Well, so there is no single standard available with the with the UDP. Unlike the other protocols, like for example SMTP, HTTP, and POP, and others. So it doesn't has any standard. So there are actually two methods of broadcasting. So here, because like one user can connect to unicast, or it can be like connecting, or like a server. Actually, this is the way how the server is actually handling, because the server is not actually handling with UDP. It is not handling one user. Rather, could be like one server sending data to more than one user. So if the server happened to send a data to one user or one client, so we call this a unicast. So a packet that is sent individually to each client. Okay, so this is a kind of configuration, by the way, that can be configured in the server to work as a unicast or multicast in within the mode of transmission. Multicast, which is the most popular or like the most common configuration mode here, it enables the server to communicate with more than one client, or like to send a packet, the same packet, duplication of the packet. What I mean a packet, it's just a piece of data from the same file to more than one server, to more than one client, without the need for each client to wait until the the adjacent client is finishing using that server connection. All right, so what are the scenario examples that can be that requires the use of media streaming services? So for example, here there are many actually beyond this list, but I'm just bringing this for you as an exemplary way and in order to clarify the scenario. So first of all, creating a standard library for training materials, for example, for new employees, that includes video here. So we're in this case we're having actually what we call we're having actually an archive of multimedia, whereby a lot of users who are employees here are actually they can be authorized to to go and connect retrieving these kind of data. Second scenario here can be like produce real-time video of a product to launch, and any kind of real-time video, like for example you're working on YouTube. Especially like nowadays there's actually it starts to become like a very kind of valuable business, especially for YouTubers who are actually benefiting from publishing kind of valuable content, very valuable contents to the to the publicity. Well, the third one here, it is online courses that use streaming. So this is actually an implementation of the streaming media services in the education and the academia. So this can allow students or like teachers or like whatever users who are actually involving in this in the education or like in the learning ring to to listen to lectures and even to review, to communicate and interact with lectures. Well, so how is this happening? Because now we were talking about there is a service. So all of this is actually a protocol. Just now we were dealing with, we were discussing that there is a protocol and what is multimedia services, that these are the, the kind of services, multimedia services that are sent over, over to, from the server to the, to the client. Yes, sometimes we can use the web server in order to make it as the host that actually accommodates all these kind of data in order to transmit it to be transmitted to the users. But frankly, when it comes, as data is getting more bigger and bigger, and as like the type of data are getting actually more richer in the amount of details in them. So the ordinary web server doesn't is not actually able to handle, will not be able to handle this. So in this case, we need actually a kind of specialized server that has been specifically developed to handle all this kind of rich multimedia, all this kind of rich data and traffic. So Helix here is one example. Helix Universal Server from Real Network. This is an organization or a company, corporation, that is actually designing that kind of protocol, that kind of server, in order to make it as one of the popular multimedia servers. What is unique in the server, and how this server how this server differs from the ordinary web server in some points here, and even beyond these points you can just review them from the textbook. But let's just count for like the features that this kind of server is able to provide. First of all, it is able to work as a multi-server used for streaming multimedia. So it is able to work with another servers, meaning that in order to, instead of making a connection from one client to one server, the client may be able to, transmit portion of the file from a particular server, and then the other portion can be transmitted from another server using what we call a server pool. So that's why we call this as a multi-server. So whereby like more than one server is cooperating with each other in order to bring, in order to, to aggregate the different files and contents for the clients. Second thing, second item is supporting all media files. More than these files are actually, so text, voice, image, video, voice note. You can even more than this, actually 3D video to say. So so all of these are actually can be supported by that kind of server. So recognizes all real-time network protocols, like these kind of protocols, because these protocols are actually multimedia protocols that are used specifically to process real-time data. And Microsoft protocols, MMS, works in both Windows, Linux, Solaris, and even a lot of operating system platforms. That's why you can see how powerful is this kind of server, that in order to dedicatedly handle and process the multimedia service. So of course, talking about this server, and I don't even need to mention this, it actually has a high capability of processing, even more powerful than the web server, because of course, since we are talking about like rich data and rich traffic to be processed and transmitted, meaning that we need to have a high capability of processing. We are talking here about like a multi-processor machine that can contain like about 64 to 100 something number of cores or like CPUs. And also the disk subsystem here also has to be hugely supported and available. So supporting real-time streaming, as we are expecting here, in dense and rich contents. So there is actually from Windows, they have provided Windows Media Services as a component here that actually can work um, as a Windows component that can work actually to process and handle multimedia service. So this is only this is just a software, not a hardware. So here we're talking about a hardware, but here It is just a software that produced by Windows in order to organize, in order to allow system administrators to organize, like multimedia services. So it has a component similar to, it is a component similar to IIS, meaning that it has an FTP, it has HTTP, because all of these protocols are the protocols that are being used. Also, it has UDP, and the most important thing here being the protocol that it's sending all these kind of data, and also these bunch of protocols. So it is kind of a control panel that is specifically designed to handle the streaming, to handle the multimedia services. So using virtual IP addresses, it allows you to work with a single machine while having different other hosts. So using a virtualization environment. So again, here in another point, it creates folder, and these folders are actually they are responsible to store advanced streaming format files, like what we call ASF. So this is a kind of format that's actually being developed by Microsoft in order to to store the advanced streaming files. Like kind of extension used for multimedia files. All right, so talking about e-commerce server, here it allows you, and this is actually another type of services that are actually available on the web. It allows the organization to communicate effectively with customers. So here e-commerce, of course, as the name states, so these are the servers that are meant to be designed and handle all the business process, all the purchasing, all the the kind of buying and selling processes that can be happening in different companies. For example, one of the most important one here, we talk about Alibaba, for example. We talk about in Oman, we talk about OLX here, and many things else. Of course, Amazon, I don't need to forget this, and Dell, for example, here. So it can be a very small and simple, a simple product selling platform to very giant and complex and global kind of platform like Amazon and Dell for this. So what are the functions that can be promoted or performed by this kind of service? So it should be able to um, make kind of marketing to the product, offer special promotions to the users, also about marketing and producing analysis. So providing based on the data collected from the from the users and from the customers on each on each item they are actually being selling or reviewing on each item. Of course, there should be kind of predictive analysis, financial tools and e-wallets here that actually allows the the manager of the website or the manager of that kind of business to suggest him what are the strategies that he should follow in order to to arrange and manage his treasury, particularly when especially when we talk about more than one multi sources, multi sources of of purchasing and selling products. Well, so Microsoft Commerce Server here, it's also an add-on. Microsoft Commerce Server, it is an add-on that can be integrated in IIS, since actually IIS it is a it is a web server. So by adding this into IIS, by adding this kind of add-on into IIS, we are enabling IIS here, or the web server. We are enabling the web server or Microsoft server to work and act as a e-commerce server, because at the end we are only in need of a library that allows us to have a bunch of features and tools that enable us to manage the the e-commerce environment. And this is all what we need actually here, rather than having a server with a specialized specifications, as we were talking about the multimedia server. So here, the same capabilities, the same hardware capabilities of the web server can be utilized in order to create an e-commerce server, but of course not. This is not the case when we talk about the streaming media servers, where here we are really in need of a high-end hardware capabilities that go beyond the the simple the simple limit that we have in the web servers. Well, so anyway, so what Microsoft Commerce Server here, what kind of features that this add-on offers to to the administrators, many actually under the hood here. It actually incorporates a number of features for required typical e-commerce site, So here we talk about like those kind of basic features that can be used in e-commerce site. It is highly customizable, meaning that every single function, it can be smoothly like manipulated and smoothly tuned up to the up to the flavor of the system administrator. And of course, but here in the other hand, it requires a lot of a lot of skilled programmers, because sometimes you will need to provide kind of coding in order to tune and configure these kind of functions, which is actually still considered kind of a limitation, particularly because here when we talk about e-commerce server, meaning that the owner of the owner of the business, or like the owner of these servers, or like those people or the customers who are using these services, they're not they're, it's not necessarily for them to be IT expertise in order to use this, and most probably because this is actually kind of marketing and uh, uh, finance. So here we're expecting them to be a businessman. We're expecting them to be from backgrounds related to system administration, related to finance, marketing, or like whatever other non-IT and non-computer science um, domains here. That's why actually this is here in this case is considered as a limitation. Well, so features that the e-commerce server that should be able, these are the considerations, or like these are the features that are actually should be available in the e-commerce servers, which are considered necessary, especially in nowadays servers. So e-commerce server should be able to handle a high volume of users, meaning that it should actually be able to interact with hundreds of users to say by identifying the level of the by identifying of course different levels here, because the users of course they shouldn't be as of the same level. Some of the users could be like a premium users, could be like basic users, because this depends on the the different plans for the products that you're actually offering to the users. And even not only customers, even the administrator, from the administrative perspective here, we talk about like reporter, we talk about like maintaining user, or like maintenance user. We also talk about like the manager himself, who should have the full access to the financial reports, and also to the different to the different aspects or features in the in the server. It should support what we call a cross selling. By this is what does it mean by cross selling here? It is the ability of promoting customers products that are related to their selected ones. So meaning that here it seems that we are we should think of kind of intelligent methods to be integrated here in order to allow the server to think, or in order to allow the that kind of application to think what are the customer preferences from the historical from his historical browsing, and then try try to suggest him kind of relevant items based on the ones that he usually used to visit more. So it uses means of data mining. That's why here we talk about this kind of intelligent algorithms that should actually enable cross-selling, and even more than this, especially also when we talk about like upsell here. So data mining here, it is the key to say in order to bring all these kind of features here. So when we talk about upsell here, it involves suggesting more profitable products. So it tells the administrator. So this is actually to the user, while this is to the customer, while this is actually a function or like a feature that should benefit the administrator, or like the business owner, by suggesting him how to provision his products and his business, by actually suggesting him more beneficial and more advantageous plans and ways in order to invest more in particular direction. Well, so this is the end of the chapter. So at the end, it was actually very sweet and short. At the end, we were actually discussing about FTP mainly, and news servers, talking about like threading and having multiple users to be in real-time communication with each other, sharing topics and discussing topics. And also we talked about telnet and how to remotely access the server, not only by telnet but also by using Windows Terminal services, that of course allows more customizable set of functions. With respect to telnet, that can actually be offered to the system administrators to use. Well, also we have talked about the streaming multimedia services, and how what are the servers that can be available for that. And also we talk about how the e-commerce servers are functioning, and what are the considerations that should be focused on when we built and develop or like design an e-commerce server. So I would like to thank you for this. And if you have any question, please just don't hesitate to ask. I mean, like within any of our discussion platforms. So thank you so much for this, and I will see you in a later lesson.